I met a friend for coffee yesterday who had just returned from what she called a spiritual reset in Bali. She was practically glowing, eager to show me this one specific photo on her phone. It was stunning. Her sitting on a rustic wooden swing, soaring over a lush jungle abyss, back to the camera, gazing out into the mist. She told me with such intense sincerity that in that moment she finally felt untethered from the modern world, that she had rediscovered her true, unique self far away from the crushing uniformity of city life. To her, that image was the undeniable proof of her liberation. But later that night, out of curiosity, I clicked on the location tag for that spot on Instagram, and the illusion just shattered. I scrolled through thousands, literally thousands of identical photos. The same swing, the same angle, the same flowy dress rental, the same candid look of contemplation. I even found a video showing the reality behind the frame. A long, sweaty queue of tourists holding numbered tickets, waiting 20 minutes for their 30 seconds of spontaneity, while staff shouted instructions on how to pose to maximize engagement. That jarring contrast between her genuine, tearful feeling of unique discovery and the highly industrialized assembly line reality of the experience left me unsettled. It wasn't just that the photo was staged, it was that her rebellion against the system had been pre-packaged and sold to her by the system itself. It forces us to ask, when we try to escape the cage of consumerism by hunting for experiences, are we actually breaking free? Or have we just walked into a larger, prettier, more temperature-controlled terrarium that we've mistaken for the wild? Okay, so let's unpack this. That story, I think, just immediately gets to the heart of this deep paradox of modern life.
It really does. This relentless hunt for an authentic, unique experience.
Right, but the experience itself is packaged and sold by the very system you think you're escaping.
Exactly. It's a closed loop. So for this deep dive, we have to explore how we got here, how consumption shifted from just, buying objects.
Signs to buying experiences. And I think critically, how our own psychological need for individuality actually ends up reinforcing this huge structural system of control.
Yeah. And to do that, our starting point has to be redefining what consumption even is in this modern world.
So where do we begin with that?
Well, it's vital that we just throw out the old economic textbook definition of consumption.
The one we all learned in school.
Right. If we look at the material that really defines this shift, the core argument is that consumption is no longer fundamentally about, say, the individual appropriation of the use value of goods.
Okay, so use value, you mean utility, function, basic satisfaction?
Exactly. We're way past the point where we buy a coat just because it's warm. Yeah. That was the industrial age, all about satisfying subsistence needs. We're in a totally new realm now.
And it's not driven by biology, it's driven by something else.
Something else entirely.
Yeah.
The core of modern consumption is the production and manipulation of social signifiers.
Social signifiers.
Think of it this way. Goods and objects, they function a lot like words in a language. They form this global, arbitrary, and really coherent system of signs.
So when I buy a specific model of car or a particular type of artisanal coffee,
you're not primarily buying transportation or caffeine, you're buying an expression. You're communicating that you belong to a certain code, a specific social classification.
That structural view suggests the kind of trade-off then. It's like we've substituted a social order of values and classification, a hierarchy of taste, of prestige for the natural or, the biological order of need.
Precisely. And because of that, the primary function of regulating how objects circulate in society isn't utility anymore. It's about ensuring a certain type of communication, a social exchange.
We're signaling to each other. We communicate our status, our aspirations, our identity through our purchases.
And the language we're using, the goods themselves, is centrally controlled.
And this is where that paradox of personalization really grabs you. I mean, my friend on that Bali swing, she was seeking a real, singular, irreducible difference. She wanted to feel unique.
Of course. But the system is built on something else entirely.
Which is?
The entire consumption process is governed by the industrial production of differences. I think this is probably the most accurate definition of the consumption system.
The industrial production of differences.
Yes. It actually eliminates genuine, singular differences between people, the stuff that makes you truly you, and it only retains the differential form, the part that can be mass-produced and sold as a distinguishing sign.
Wow. So the system is essentially saying, we value uniqueness, but only the specific kinds of uniqueness that we can manufacture.
That's it.
You think you're carving out your own path, but you're really just selecting Bohemian Traveler Option C from a mass-produced menu of individuality.
And the irony is just, it's so deep.
Yeah.
Because the desire to differentiate yourself just means affiliating with an abstract model, a combinatorial pattern of fashion. The very act of particularizing yourself
Is an act of conforming.
It's an act of conforming to a predefined code. I mean, think about that incredibly compelling, almost tautological marketing slogan. The body you dream of is your own.
It's so insidious because it frames conformity as destiny. You strive to be truly yourself by matching some reference ideal of wellness, of travel, of success. And in doing so, you are most fully obeying the collective imperative. You're just coinciding with a mass-produced model.
It's the millions of consumers who dream of a product that's specially designed for her alone. The realization is that the singular is just another mass-produced difference, ready for immediate, high-volume consumption.
And this endless process of conforming to the code, it's all tied up with status, isn't it? Which brings up a really powerful distinction you pointed out.
It does. This whole pursuit of status through objects, it's a desperate battle. You're trying to attain a status of personal grace, or what you could call God-givenness.
You're trying to use things you've bought to demonstrate an innate, unearned excellence.
Yes. You're touching on some almost theological concepts here, like salvation by grace versus salvation by works.
Okay, so how does that apply to the modern status economy?
Well, think about the elite. True high status. That's salvation by grace. It's the preserve of the upper classes who prove their excellence somewhere else. Through inherited legitimacy, through real power, through an internalized culture that requires no obvious effort.
Their status is just assumed. It's like a birthright.
It's a birthright. For everyone else, though, consumption becomes salvation by works.
Meaning salvation through objects, services, experiences.
Exactly. So they constantly have to work to prove they're worthy of the status they're trying to buy. They have to keep upgrading, keep consuming the right signs, attending the right retreats, wearing the right brands, all to maintain this moral demonstration of their worthiness.
And it's a race you can't win.
You can't. Because the signs are mass-produced and they get copied so quickly that status is perpetually out of reach if you're only using bought signs, which means the system has to structurally maintain inequality to keep the whole engine running. If it didn't, the signs would lose their differential power.
Which brings us right to the differential dynamic of needs. The system seems rigged to make sure we're always chasing a gap.
That's the key mechanism of growth. A growth society produces goods and needs at the same time. But, and this is the critical part, the rate of need production, which is driven by this logic of social differentiation and status competition.
It progresses faster.
It tends to progress faster than the production of the material and cultural goods themselves.
It's what you called an irreversible psychological takeoff. Once that aspiration gets activated by social competition, especially in these hyper-connected urban environments, it just becomes unlimited, uncontrollable.
It's an arms race of desire. And this creates a kind of functional disequilibrium. This discrepancy between the goods that are available and the needs that are generated isn't a bug in the system.
It's a feature.
It is functionally implicated in the system of growth itself. And we see this play out so acutely with people who are trying to climb that vertical social ladder, but constantly feel like they're failing.
Let me just try to translate some of that heavy academic language for you listening. This discrepancy, it leads to what's been called psychological pauperization.
A very good term for it.
Right. So you might be materially richer than your parents, you might have more square footage or better technology, but because the pace of aspiration, the signs you need to consume just to feel normal, keeps accelerating, you end up feeling poorer, more anxious, less fulfilled than ever before.
That is the perfect summary. This discrepancy fosters a chronic, latent state of crisis, which is functionally linked to growth. We see this compulsion to overconsume, especially among the lower classes, as a kind of compensation.
Compensation for the felt failure to rise up that social ladder?
Exactly. So overconsumption expresses a demand for status and the felt failure of that demand all at the same time. The system, therefore, it speculates upon this discrepancy, this perpetual excess of needs over the supply of goods, and it stabilizes itself around a certain rate of distortion.
So we're not actually moving toward an affluent society where everyone eventually has enough, which is what the democratic myths promise us?
No. We're moving toward a society where the rate of distortion, the distance between the highest and lowest aspirational levels, is structurally preserved. The entire compromise of growth society is between that promise of affluence and the fundamental imperative of maintaining an order of privilege and domination.
Wow. That's a profound idea. The promise of democratization is just an essential alibi for the viability of the system of domination. So, if the underlying logic of all this consumption is about structural signs and social differentiation, then those signs need a setting, right? They can't just float around in the ether. They need a specific kind of environment where they can all be blended and exchanged and regenerated seamlessly.
Right. And that's where we need to talk about the physical containers of this total consumption.
The new means of consumption.
Exactly. We borrow that term from Marx's means of production, which focused on the tools used to make things. But here, the focus is entirely on structuring and controlling the consumer experience. We're talking about the modern shopping center, or what used to be called the super drugstore.
And the old school department store was different. It segregated its products. You had clothing over here, groceries way over there.
Yes, but the modern model achieves a total synthesis of all consumer activities. Shopping, entertainment, just wandering around playfully. All the permutational possibilities of the signs are brought together.
It's about lumping all the signs together indiscriminately, treating all categories of commodities from, I don't know, high fashion and fitness equipment to organic carrots as just partial fields of one big sign-consuming totality.
And the critical innovation here is the absorption of the cultural sphere into this space.
You're saying culture isn't separate anymore.
It's not just that culture is now commercialized. It's that culture is culturalized and commodities are culturalized in their turn. The art exhibit space is right next to the luxury watch boutique. The educational seminar is adjacent to the specialty coffee bar.
So everything becomes an aesthetic sign, and they're all interchangeable and have equal value within this climate-controlled environment.
And the ultimate architectural expression of this total homogenization, the total environment, is often seen in those giant pioneering shopping centers, like Parley 2. That structure perfectly encapsulates the shift from the messy, contradictory city to a totally organized consumer environment.
This is that idea of engineered placelessness we were talking about before. It's a space that could be anywhere because it's defined by commerce, not community or history.
Parley 2 was designed as a future city, a kind of sublimate of all real life. The fundamental achievement is the abolition of conflict, of labor, of contradiction. All that's left is an internal combinatory of ambience. The famous slogan was that the beauty of the setting is the prime requirement for happy living.
That sounds suspiciously like total control, just masked as total happiness. What was the main mechanism for this total organization?
The climate. The structure is wholly exempt from seasons, from bad weather, because of an exceptional system of climate control. It's an engineered utopia.
Making for
A perpetual springtime.
perpetual springtime. That is such a chillingly poetic image for the erasure of reality. I mean, reality has seasons. It has dirt, contradiction, unexpected interactions, genuine discomfort. And that discomfort is often where real meaning or resistance is born.
Exactly. Work, leisure, nature, culture, everything that was once dispersed and generated friction in our messy, anarchic cities is now mixed, blended, climatized, and homogenized in this sweeping vista of perpetual shopping. The space is a functional pantheon, or maybe a pandemonium, where all the gods or demons of consumption are united.
So the quest my friend had to escape the crushing uniformity of the city on that swing, it actually leads us right back into this more perfected, climate-controlled uniformity of the mall.
It's a space where life is superseded in the ease and translucidity of an abstract happiness.
And that happiness is defined only by the resolution of tensions.
There is no tension, because all contradictions have been functionally removed or blended together. Even cash, which is too visible, a symbol of real economic and social contradictions, is often replaced by the credit card, ensuring a fully lubricated, frictionless consumption experience.
This blending and control, it doesn't just stop with physical space. It extends into our intellectual lives, too, with this concept of cultural recycling. We're forced to constantly update ourselves, just like we update our phones.
The speed is the key. Professional expertise, culture, social position. They're now subject to recycling. This is not the rational accumulation of knowledge over a lifetime.
No.
This is an accelerated, obligatory, arbitrary change running parallel to fashion that imposes a kind of built-in obsolescence on knowledge and, by extension, on people.
So if you don't continually update your expertise, if you don't keep up with the latest management trends or software versions, you fall behind. You are no longer a productive citizen of the consumer society. Culture isn't made to last. It's condemned to be an ephemeral sign.
The cultural content is secondary. What matters is the consumption of culture as a sign of your status, of your personalization. You're consuming an aesthetic recycling of yourself, which is the equivalent of packaging and showing off an object.
And speaking of packaging and showing off, we have to talk about the physical artifacts of this new environment, kitsch and the gadget. We all know kitsch is, the plaster replica or the fake African mask, but the argument is that it's actually everywhere.
It is everywhere. Kitsch is a pseudo-object. It's a simulation. It's defined by a dearth of real signification, but a superabundance of signs and allegorical references. It's the cultural category of the simulation, the copy, the stereotype.
So it's not just a physical souvenir from a trip?
No, it can be the entire simulated village feel of a new residential development. It's the glorification of disparate, meaningless detail without a coherent underlying purpose.
Okay, and then there's the gadget. The machine was the emblem of industrial society driven by efficiency. What is the gadget's role in this new world?
The gadget is the emblem of post-industrial society. It's defined by its potential uselessness and its looted combinatorial value. The object of consumption is characterized by kind of functional uselessness. What's being consumed is precisely something other than the useful. The gadget is the pure expression of that truth.
Can you give us a really accessible, modern example? Not just a physical toy, but something we might see in our homes right now.
Absolutely. Think of the specialized, single-function, high-end appliance. The smart toaster that can only make one specific type of perfectly caramelized slice, or the $400 digital water bottle that tells you when to hydrate.
Right. Its complexity vastly outstrips its actual utility.
Or smart home technology that solves problems you never knew you had, requiring immense technical setup for a negligible gain. The expense and the effort involved in acquiring and managing its uselessness functions as a sign of affluence.
The ultimate sign of status. I can afford to buy things I absolutely do not need simply because I find them playful or interesting.
Yes. The gadget marks the generalized disappearance of use value and the symbolic function. And this phenomenon, it casts a suspicion of artificiality and fakery over the whole environment of objects, and by extension, over our human and social relations. If everything we buy is inherently a useless sign, does that suggest everything else is too?
We've moved from consuming objects to consuming signs, and then from consuming signs to consuming our very selves and our experiences inside these controlled, placeless environments. We have to look at how the system has made the self the ultimate commodity, ripe for exploitation.
And the body is the primary battleground. It's now treated as the finest of all objects. It's a form of capital, something to be invested in and enhanced. Instead of seeking salvation through the soul, society now seeks salvation through the body. Intense therapies, strict regimes, endless self-optimization.
It's the ultimate form of self-exploitation, but it's disguised as self-care. It creates this homology between bodies and objects. The body, once it's liberated from traditional moral constraints and treated as an object, enters the same network of signs as any other commodity, ready for enhancement and display.
And this results in the magical equation that underpins so much of modern lifestyle marketing. Buy this and you will be at ease in your body. The only drive that seems to be truly liberated is the drive to buy goods and services aimed at enhancing the body as an object. Modern eroticism, fitness, hygiene, they're all steeped in an environment teeming with products and gadgets that promise transformation.
So health is clearly no longer just a biological imperative linked to survival. It's a social imperative. It's linked to status and prestige display. The glow my friend had in Bali wasn't purely spiritual. It was the result of a perfectly executed consumption of wellness signs. The sunshine, the mandated relaxation, the expensive retreat food, all proving her social fitness.
And the corollary to that is that any loss of prestige or any social reversal is immediately somatized. It shows up in the body. When a high-achieving executive is judged not just on work efficiency, but on physical fitness, clothing style, and slenderness, his body becomes a public sign of his status or his decline.
The anxiety must be intense.
It is, precisely because this capital, the body, is always depreciating unless you are constantly investing in its maintenance.
The pressure for display is just enormous. And this system of commodifying the self naturally extends to time itself, specifically our leisure time. We chase free time as this great escape from the constraints of work, believing that's where our authenticity lives.
But leisure is structurally complementary to constraint and work. It's defined as an unproductive consumption of time that is, in fact, the very moment of the production of value.
What kind of value?
distinctive value, status value, prestige value.
So even when we are lying on a beach, we are performing a kind of labor. We're demonstrating our freedom not to perform productive labor by engaging in specific, prescribed, and often expensive activities like that Bali retreat.
Leisure is a collective vocation. It's an internalized social norm. It reflects the principle of maximization of needs and satisfactions in the private sphere, which perfectly mirrors the maximization of production in the social sphere.
You feel like you have to maximize your time off, otherwise you're failing to enjoy life properly.
Right. And this is exactly what the Bali swing illustrates. The explicit motive is this pursuit of solitude and freedom, yet the marked tendency is towards the physical concentration of tourists, the sweaty queues, the numbered tickets.
The pursuit of an authentic experience requires conforming to the code of what an authentic experience is supposed to look like. The specific aesthetic, the right angle for the photograph, the presence of others doing the exact same thing to validate it.
This mass concentration obeys the same principle of constraint that you experience in work. You're constrained to perform freedom according to the mass-produced script.
It's the ultimate standardization of the unique.
I know.
And we also have to consider the perception of where all these goods and experiences even come from, because it's a source of profound denial for us. We often feel that consumer goods are a kind of miraculous gift, completely severed from the concept of work.
This is the cargo cult analogy. It is. The Melanesian natives saw Westerners receiving these vast quantities of manufactured goods arriving from the sky via ships and planes. They thought the goods were intended for them by their ancestors, but had been intercepted by the foreigners. So they built these simulacra of airplanes and runways, waiting for the miraculous cargo to arrive for them.
And we exhibit a similar fundamental misrecognition today.
You do.
So how does that look in a modern context? When we buy a new smartphone, what are we denying?
We deny the entire global labor chain. We deny the origin of the raw materials, the conditions in the factories, the immense logistical effort, the low wages, the shipping pollution that brought that flawless gleaning device into our hand.
We just perceive the profusion of goods as a blessing, a natural force of affluence, a miraculous technological harnessing of power rather than products that embody exploited work.
Which allows us to live, sheltered by signs, in the denial of the real.
So we consume signs that are accredited with the guarantee of the real. We buy the moral purity of the organic vegetable, denying the complex, often contradictory supply chain that brought it to the climate-controlled supermarket.
And our relation to the real world, to politics, to history, to social contradictions, environmental collapse, is not one of committed responsibility or genuine interest. It's one of curiosity.
Curiosity, not engagement.
We avidly apprehend the signs of reality, but we deny the real consequences. Think about the passionate exploitation of road accidents or environmental disasters in the mass media.
The consumption of tragedy.
The crash, the fire, the flood. These function as gigantic happenings. They afford society, through this ritual destruction of material and life, the spectacular proof of its excessive affluence. A proof that is far more effective in the depths of our imagination than the direct proof by accumulation.
We consume the image of tragedy, which reinforces the myth that we're powerful enough to overcome these things. It confirms our status as citizens of affluence. We're fascinated, but we remain safely detached. So if we accept that consumption is driven by the production of differences, and that it has colonized leisure, the body, and even our relationship with reality itself, then we have to confront the final, most unsettling question. How did the system manage to transition and enforce this total control over our sense of freedom? And why did the very movements that sought liberation end up reinforcing the cage?
This is where we need to look at the historical reboot of capitalism. The move from the industrial Fordist economy, the classic assembly line, to the post-Fordist economy, which is characterized by the rise in cognitive, immaterial labor, knowledge work, information manipulation, service provision.
Right. The old Fordist system demanded stability, uniformity, rigid hierarchy. But the new cognitive economy required flexibility, diversity, and individuality. The very things that countercultural movements were demanding in the 1960s and 70s.
And this is the profound historical irony. The revolutionary charge of the movements that fought against the old, rigid capitalism demanding freedom, creativity, imagination, they objectively became an alliance that helped establish the new spirit of capitalism successfully and smoothly.
Their rebellion was precisely what modern capitalism needed to rationalize and modernize its own system.
The demands for imagination and freedom were embraced by the ideologists of the new capitalism. If this was a revolution, it was a successful one for the system, which modernized itself by incorporating the language of liberation.
And the consequence of that is devastating for the individual psyche.
It is. The old objective social laws, like losing your job due to economic cycles or structural inequality, are now presented as a result of personal psychological failure. Social contradictions are increasingly presented as expressions of interiority.
So you lost your job not because the market is volatile, but because you failed to innovate or network or be flexible enough. You failed your true self. This shift, this personalization of failure, is achieved through a really deep psychological mechanism related to assigned freedom.
And this brings us to a key concept from social psychology: cognitive dissonance. It reveals the most dangerous mechanism of submission, which is the lack of recognition of external determinations. If we cling to this idea of absolute freedom, we are, in fact, more effectively trapped.
Let's talk about the extreme experiments that demonstrate this, the earthworm scenario.
Yeah.
They illustrate what happens when you're coerced, but you're told you made a free choice.
Okay, so the experiment involved participants who initially found the idea of eating earthworms absolutely disgusting. They were assigned the task by what they were told was a random computer. Later, the experimenters went back and told them, actually, that computer assignment was just a suggestion. The choice was truly yours.
So they introduced the illusion of freedom after the fact.
Exactly. And here's the profound twist. A great number of these individuals then decided to eat the worms, which they had previously described as disgusting.
Why?
Because since they believed they had freely chosen to participate, they experienced cognitive dissonance. The conflict between the belief, I hate worms, and the action, I ate worms. To resolve this, they performed these intense mental acrobatics to justify the decision.
They started thinking things like, well, worms might be a good source of protein, or I'm doing this for the sake of scientific advancement, or even this just proves I'm an open-minded person.
Yes. They changed their internal convictions to align with the coerced action. They started seeing it as an expression of their true self.
And the danger emerges in the next step.
The two-thirds of participants, the internalizers, who adhered to the choice to prove their own consistency, they were then offered electroshocks, another highly unpleasant action, as part of a follow-up test.
And they consented.
They freely consented to the shock. They had internalized the initial coercion as an expression of their own nature.
So they submitted not only with individual acts, but with their entire nature. They thought every challenge, even the explicitly enforced or unpleasant ones, as an expression of their winning nature, or maybe just accepting their unfortunate nature.
The system grants a specific, narrow type of freedom, the freedom to choose how you submit. But if you don't have the ability to deny the choice entirely, that freedom enslaves you.
So it reveals that the recognition of limitations, the objective constraints placed upon you, is a condition for the realization of genuine freedom.
Yes. Treating objective determinants, like economic constraint or social pressure, as if they are pure expressions of the self, leads to effective self-submission. The moment you are asked to be flexible, diverse, and entrepreneurial about your own life, you have internalized the system's needs as your own destiny.
And this self-submission, it leads to a profound form of alienation, something much deeper than the classical economic concept of being separated from the product of your labor. The system doesn't just take your output, it takes your self-image.
Right. And the problem is that the part of ourselves we alienate, our image, our labor, our psychic ability, the authentic self we display on Instagram, it doesn't just run off into some neutral circuit. It returns to haunt us negatively.
We can use that old German allegory, the student of Prague, to illustrate this haunted self.
A perfect example. The student sells his image, his reflection for gold. Subsequently, that alienated image, which is a hostile caricature of himself, begins to hunt him. It becomes a fully autonomous, malevolent version of his former self, and it eventually leads to his death. It translates the unvarnished truth of alienation into a chilling metaphor.
The moment my friend bought that packaged experience on the Bali swing, her ideal self, the untethered traveler, became an externally owned, exploitable sign. And now she feels compelled to constantly perform that sign to maintain its value, which takes the form of relentless posting and validation seeking. Her own image has returned to demand her psychic labor.
This is the realization that the thing consuming you, your alienated labor, your social sign, your perfect image, is structurally identical to you. But now it functions against your interests. It's a hostile mirror. The object, the image, the product of our labor takes its revenge. It is still us, but dispossessed and negative.
And that brings us to the most complex phrase of this deep dive, the sorcery of the otherness of the same.
This is the critical insight. In the social analogy, our social labor power, once it's sold, returns through the cycle of the commodity to dispossess us of the meaning of our labor. It becomes the materialized obstacle to the fruits of our efforts.
And this is the sorcery because it's not an external enemy. It's the externalized us that is now doing the controlling.
Yes, it shatters the reassuring fiction that our inner self, our soul, is a private sphere that's safely free of the world. Even your internal desire for authenticity is immediately captured and weaponized against you.
So whether it's the cognitive worker selling their generic capacity for speaking to a corporate structure, or the tourist selling their image of the liberated self on the Bali swing, that alienated image becomes the new master.
The system forces cognitive workers, who possess their own intellectual means of production, onto the market through political and juridical arrangements, like intellectual property rights. This forces them to submit to exploitation by means other than their separation from the means of production, forcing this self-exploitation model where they willingly work overtime, constantly upgrade their skills, and internalize competition as personal ambition. So we have thoroughly traced the evolution of consumer society from, simple utility to a coherent system of signs, all driven by social differentiation and the constant pursuit of status. We saw how this system materialized in these climate-controlled total environments, the new means of consumption like Partly 2, which abolish contradiction in favor of abstract happiness and perpetual shopping. Critically, we established that the consumption of experiences, of feelings, of the self is structural, and that the quest for individual difference is precisely what is industrialized. We saw the profound denial of reality that's enabled by that cargo cult myth. And finally, the system's reboot into post-Fordism leveraged the very demands for freedom and flexibility, transforming social contradictions into psychological failures, and using the seductive mechanism of assigned freedom to achieve effective self-submission, a state where the alienated self returns as a haunting caricature, demanding perpetual performance.
The journey started with the friend on the swing, earnestly seeking genuine singularity or authenticity, and it concludes by confirming that this very quest is immediately coded by the system. The rebellion against the structure is sold back to you as a sign that you are uniquely you, and in buying it, you reinforce the very code that connects everyone to the same system of differentiation and control. It's an elegant, inescapable trap where freedom itself, unless we consciously recognize its limitations, is the mechanism of submission.
The consumer society is its own myth. It convinces us of affluence merely by making us believe in its existence. This immense collective narcissism induces society to merge itself into and absolve itself in the image and presence of itself. And the most rigorous approach is to recognize the mythological discourse that swamps the objects we consume, revealing that the ultimate logic of contemporary culture is one of total integration into an environment that celebrates its own manufactured reality.